Hey, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Noshin Premji, and it's with great pleasure that I welcome you to the lecture, The Fatimids in Conversation, Power, Culture and Legacy. I would say it's very fitting since we have a powerhouse of Fatimid experts on our panel. So power is definitely something there, and culture and legacy also. Um, a special welcome to those of you who are joining us online. So a little bit about our speakers this evening. We have, of course, Dr. Delia Cortese, who is a senior research fellow at Middlesex University. She's a specialist in medieval Ismailism and code ecology. Besides the book, The Fatimid, A Portrait of a Dynasty, which we are going to be talking about today, her books include Women and the Fatimids in the World of Islam, which she did together with Simonetta Calderini, who's in the audience, I believe, in 2006. Her research also includes important work on Ismaili texts and traditions, notably Ismaili and other Arabic manuscripts, a descriptive catalogue of manuscripts in the library of the Institute of Ismaili Studies. On your seats, you will find a lovely little discount flyer, which if you are very excited by the publication of this book and feel inspired by the talk this evening, you can get a lovely 20% off with the flyer on your chair. For those of you online, we'll put that code in the chat box as the presentation goes on. Joining Delia in conversation is Dr. Shainool Jiwa. Dr. Jiwa is a specialist in Fatimid studies and an associate professor at the Institute of Ismaili Studies. Her publications include The Fatimids II, The Rule from Egypt in 2023, which is part of a World of Islam series, where she's also the general editor. She's also the author of The Fatimids, The Rise of a Muslim Empire, which I like to call The Fatimids 1, I guess, because it's the previous book, right, for Fatimids 2. She's the co-editor of The Shi'i World, Pathways in Tradition and Modernity, which was in 2015, The Fatimid Caliphate, Diversity of Traditions in 2017, Fatimid Cosmopolitanism, History, Material Culture, Politics, and Religion in 2025. So there's quite a lot of books on the Fatimids. You can see we've got a real expert on the panel. She's also edited and translated key medieval Arabic texts relating to Fatimid history, which includes Towards a Shi'i Mediterranean Empire in 2009 and The Founder of Cairo in 2013. Moderating this discussion will be Dr. Farhad Daftary. Dr. Daftary, I'm sure, needs no introduction, as he is an astounding author who has written more than 200 articles and encyclopedia entries and several acclaimed books, including the Ismailis, Their History and Doctrines, The Assassin Legends, not to be confused with the video game, but a short history of the Ismailis, Ismaili literature. I can go on and on about the array of publications that Dr. Daftary has published, but I guess, we wouldn't have a lecture if I did that, so I will leave it there. So before welcoming our speakers, I'd like to introduce Dr. and Professor Zain Qasim, who's Director of the Institute of Ismaili Studies, for her opening remarks. Professor Qasim will be followed by Professor Walid Ghali, who is the head of the Aga Khan Library. Please join me in welcoming them.
Well, first of all, I'd like to welcome you all on this somewhat gray and rainy afternoon to what I think is going to be an amazing conversation. We are in that historical moment where you have three Fatimid historians that are going to be interacting with each other. And I am happy to say that the Fatimid philosophers are also present in this room, myself being one of them. I see Maria de Chilis is another, and I'm sure there are others here as well. I first came across Dr. Delia Cortese's work as the work on women. And at that point, I didn't really know who she was. And I thought, oh, this is another new person joining Fatimid studies. And I was very excited. And the book absolutely proved to be amazing. So that predates my actually physically meeting you. And I'm really excited to read this work when I am able to do so. And Dr. Shainool Jiwa, of course, she and I met as graduate students at McGill. And that's when she was beginning her work on the Fatimids, and I was beginning my work on the Fatimid philosophers. And we had many, many, many good conversations. And Dr. Daftary, I think I have said in other forums as well, is the one who actually put Ismaili studies on the map with respect to his absolutely prodigious and very careful scholarship on many aspects of Ismailism. Uh, Even though I think, I mean, as a historian, not only is he extremely broad, but he also is very pivotal and important for allowing us to see the Fatimids as part of a much longer history. Now, why the Fatimids are so significant for me is that I think that this is a period in history where there can never be too many studies done on the Fatimids. And the reason for this is that the Fatimids were operational at a time that was very relevant to our age today. For one thing, Cairo, Egypt was almost a crossroads of civilizations at that time, and it still continues to be. But at that time, what was amazing was the pluralism, the plurality of communities and um, thought streams that were emerging out of North Africa at the time. Everything from the Greeks, if not before the Greeks, to, the best of what was indigenously developing as forms of philosophy beyond the Greeks, right? Historically, of course, we see things like that are really important to us today. For example, how environmental issues were being handled. In fact, we have a conference coming up on air, water, fire, earth, and ether in towards the end of March. So I hope some of you will attend that. But the Fatimids actually, their governance, how they handled a pluralistic society, their relations in interfaith manners, their contribution to trade, their maritime activities. I mean, the life that went on. It's just there's just so much research to be done. And so for me, it's very exciting to see a discussion on what your research is bringing up. And I am really grateful to all of you for being here. And I hope it's a great conversation.
Thank you very much, Delia, for inviting me for just to say a few things. And for those who don't know me, I'm Walid Ghali. I'm the head of the Aga Khan Library, professor of Arabic and Islamic Studies at the Aga Khan University, London. Also, I first come to know Delia a long time ago, remotely, via her catalog on Ismaili manuscripts, where I learned a lot from this particular catalog, and possibly that was my window to start my work on manuscripts as a cataloger, and that was in the Middle Ages. It's believed that Einstein once said that the only thing that you absolutely have to know is the location of the library. And if you want to know not only the library, if you want to know how to be successful, come and see Delia inside our library upstairs on the 3rd floor. I'm doing some marketing, but in a new way. So as a head of the Aga Khan Library, I ought to say a few words about the Aga Khan Library. Aga Khan Library aspires to be the world-class library or repository for collection, scholarly manuscripts, archival materials on Islamic studies at large, but with a deep and in-depth focus, scholarly focus on Shia studies and Ismailism. And I'm not bragging, but I'm sure that Delia has benefited a lot from the library here and the library resources. In figures, the Aga Khan Library is around 60,000 volumes at the moment. At least I guarantee 12,000 titles unique all on Fatimid Ismaili studies if we ought to compare it with other libraries in Europe. So we have at least out of the 60,000 or 58,000 volumes, we have at least 12,000 titles are unique and in-depth scholarly works on Fatimid studies and Ismaili studies and Shia studies. That's about the collection. There are nicely designed bookmarks waiting for you outside if you want to collect a few of them, use them, and also come and visit the library and utilize the resources. I'm looking at, thank you very much, Delia and Shainool and Dr. Daftary. I'm so much looking forward for the conversation tonight, and I'm bringing to you this one, as I know that Delia already interested in on fiction and the Fatimid. So this is one of the new books in the library about at least 5 novels on Fatimids with very critical analysis. That's for you anyway. Thank you very much.
Let's mix it. Yes. Well, let me just open by saying that Ismaili and also Fatimid studies have really witnessed an unprecedented, amazing progress since the middle of the 20th century, and this was mainly due to the fact that for the first time since then, scholars found access to a wide range of genuine Ismaili sources, which also, of course, covered Shia Fatimids. Now, if we look at the first monograph that came out on the Fatimids, that was a brief monograph, well, not so brief, but a monograph by a scholar called O'Leary, Dolasi O'Leary, a short history of the Fatimid Caliphate, published in 1923, in which you do not find a single reference to any Ismaili or Fatimid sources. Now, forward, about 20 years later, you have the first really proper work on the history of the Fatimids written by Zahid Ali, and published in Urdu in 1948, in which the author had used a wide selection of the Ismaili sources that existed in his own private collection. Then after that, the progress really took off, and we had a whole new generation of scholars active in Fatimid studies, and producing profusely scholars such as Heinz Harm, Paul Walker, Michael Brett, and Jiwa, and a number of Egyptian scholars like Ayman Ford, and so on. So your works really has a very illustrious pedigree. So you come after a long line of not good and also very good authors and sources. Now, I'm sure you will talk about your work, but in your opening remarks, I wonder if you could also cover your motivations. What did really motivate you now to write your work on the Fatimids, and how do you think your work specifically the approach that you adopted in your work, how does it differ from the approaches that you find in some of these other previously published publications?
Thank you very much for this very kind introduction. First of all, thank you for being here tonight, those present and those who are following us online. Thank you to Professor Kassem for the honor and the privilege to present this book here. to Professor Ghali for making me belong to the Middle Ages. So, okay. So it feels like you've been there a long time in the library working hard, but it's always a pleasure. So I advise everybody to come and use the library because it's a perfect setting. So to Dr. Daftary for no pressure, listing all the monumental works that have been done before me, but I'm also grateful that such a big works were produced by my colleagues here, by those colleagues who are following us online. You know who you are. So thank you very much for all the groundwork that you have done, the monumental work, and for making my life easier because you have really sort of provided me with an excellent base to build my book on, but at the same time also the pressure to say something different, something new. And I hope that in my little short presentation, I will be able to answer Dr. Daftary's question. So it is a great honor to open this event by talking about my latest book, The Fatimids Portrait of a Dynasty, a work that is the result of long-term research involving sustained engagement with primary and secondary sources and ongoing dialogue with scholars, you know who they are now, and students as well. So it's interesting how talking to students about what I was doing brought out questions that have stimulated inquiries. The guiding ambition of this work is to combine historical rigor with interpretative synthesis and narrative flair, offering not a comprehensive manual, but rather a historically grounded portrait of one of the most complex and fascinating dynasties of the medieval Islamic world. The concept of portrait is central here. Rather than pursuing a strictly linear narrative, the book seeks to capture the political, religious, cultural, and human dimensions of the Fatimid experience, acknowledging its internal tensions, the brilliance, and also some structural frailties. So it's about really capturing what is called, the spirit of this time, the human dimension, the character of this dynasty. From a confessional standpoint, here I have to give a bit of a broader introduction about the Fatimids because I realize that not all of you may be expert about it or know about it. From a confessional standpoint, the Fatimid dynasty emerged from a minority within a minority, the Ismaili Shia, in contrast to the Sunni majority of the Islamic world. The dynasty was founded in 909 in present-day Tunisia by Abdallah, who, with the title of Al-Mahdi, was recognized by most Ismailis as the first Fatimid Imam Caliph. The designation Fatimid derives from the belief that the Imam, his predecessors and his successors, were direct descendants of Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad, who for this community became the symbolic mother of the Imams. This makes the Fatimid the only Islamic dynasty known after the name of a woman. From their original base in North Africa, the Fatimids expanded eastwards. After displacing the Sunni Shiites, they conquered Egypt and founded Cairo in 969. So they really put Egypt on the cultural, intellectual, political map in a way that was never done similarly before. From Cairo, the Fatimids governed a vast and heterogeneous empire encompassing North Africa and Sicily, Egypt, of course, then parts of Syria and Palestine, the Arabian Peninsula, with intermittent influences extended as far as Central Asia. The Fatimid period was often been described as integral part of the so-called golden age of Islamic history, notwithstanding the fact that, like with other Islamic dynasties, the Fatimid too were not immune from the dynastic conflict, military pressure, economic instability, and the climate crisis. So one thing that I've actually done, maybe that others haven't done before, in my book, I've integrated aspects of environmental history and how it affected the success or indeed the problems that the dynasty faced. We are talking about the medieval period, the medieval warmer period, and I've integrated some element of that in my book. Under the Fatimids, Cairo emerged as the capital of a rival caliphate that directly challenged the Sunni Abbasids of Baghdad, the Umayyads of Al-Andalus, and the Byzantine Empire. The city quickly became one of the most dynamic urban centers of the medieval Islamic world. Among the most enduring Fatimids foundation is the Mosque of Al-Azhar, completed in 972. Although today it is the preeminent institution of Sunni Islamic learning, its origins are Fatimid and Ismaili, illustrating, therefore, the layered and often paradoxical legacies of this dynasty. During the Fatimid period, state structure consolidated in a climate marked, bar few notable exceptions, by tolerance and inclusivity towards Christians, Jews, and the majority Sunni Muslims. The Fatimid court, the regime bureaucracy, and the economy flourished. Military campaigns in Syria and Palestine were paired with an expansive Mediterranean trade network. Libraries were established, intellectual production intensified, and the Ismaili propaganda network evolved into a highly organized institution integrated into the machinery of the state. It was also during this phase that the foundation of Ismaili legal doctrine were finalized and systematized. A pivotal and controversial figure in this history is the Imam Caliph al-Hakim. Impossible not to mention him. His reign has generated a vast and often polemical historiography. Al-Hakim was alternatively feared, revered, and even divinized. He founded the Dar al-Ilm, the House of Knowledge, an institution that functioned as an interconfessional center for learning and scientific inquiry. In my book, and this is perhaps a bit different from what has been written before, his reign is reassessed through a careful contextualization that departs from either straightforward condemnation of this figure or indeed glorification. So I try to explain that by contextualizing events that are linked to controversial events that are linked to his activities, to explain, to try and see why he might have acted in particular ways, or try to understand it in a more objective way. The Fatimids stood out for their tolerance towards non-Muslims. Medieval history is often imagined through conflict and crusades, but as I've shown, I hope I've shown in my book, the Fatimid experience is far more nuanced. We find mixed families within the royal household. Some Imam Caliphs married Christian women. Sons of imams and future rulers were often educated by Christian tutors. In my book, I discuss how Christians and Jews played major roles in the administration of the regime, and some even served as physicians to the Imam Caliphs. Religious dialogue was not incidental, as opportunities for debates among Muslim Christians and Jews were created. Diplomacy mirrored this complexity. Fatimid Byzantine relations included embassies, gift giving, and regularly renewed truces. Yet this world was not obviously without its shadows. The second part of the book broadens the analytical lens by asking how the Fatimids understood and represented the world as they knew it, drawing on geographical description of Cairo, Fustat, Alexandria, Tunis, and Upper Egypt, as well as accounts of relations with Sub-Saharan Africa, India, and Central Asia. The book reflects a cosmopolitan worldview shaped by trade, diplomacy, and intellectual curiosity. At the same time, it examines the structure of the Fatimid state, including the relationship between religious and secular institutions. Obviously, a relation that is often blurred between what is religious and what is secular, and contextualizes the full spectrum of cultural production: literature, architecture, calligraphy, and the decorative arts. Evidence of this artistic and material flourishing can be traced well beyond Egypt and North Africa. From Egypt, ivories, textiles, rock crystal, and metalwork circulated across the Mediterranean region and beyond. Some were transformed once in Europe into Christian devotional objects. A chapter that is particularly close to my heart is devoted to women in the Fatimid society. It is based partly on the book that the Women and the Fatimids that was published in 2006 in collaboration together with Professor Calderini, who is here with us tonight. Since then, both myself and Simonetta Calderini have continued to work on women under the Fatimids, and this new book features new findings. In it, large space is given, of course, to the women of the Fatimid court, but also to those women who participated in everyday economic life of the regime. No golden age, however, is immune to decline. During the long reign of Al-Mustansir, the Fatimid state experienced a devastating political and economic crisis known as the Shidda, the Great Calamity. This was followed by a major schism within Ismailis between the Nizari Ismailis and the Mustali Ismailis. The loss of Jerusalem to the Crusades in 1099 and the growing dominance of military viziers. Although the dynasty experienced a final phase of economic and artistic revival, its political authority steadily eroded, culminating in the abolition of the dynasty in 1171 by Salah ad-Din, the Sunni, who was the last vizier of the Fatimids and then extinguished the dynasty and started the Sunni dynasty, the Ayyubids, afterwards. The final chapter of the book turns to reception and legacy. Contemporary Ismaili communities, mostly notably the Nizar Ismailis, led by the Aga Khan, and the Bora communities of South Asia, continue to engage with this heritage. The Fatimid legacy survives in monuments, manuscripts, textiles, ceramics, rock crystal, ivories, jewelry, and other objects now held in museums worldwide. It also persists in modern cultural representation, from historical novels and television adaptations to films, video games, and the digital sphere. So, why the Fatimid? Why this book? The Fatimids' Portrait of a Dynasty seeks to bring this history to a broader public while remaining grounded in scholarship. It aims to challenge reductive views of Islam as monolithic or inherently conflictual, highlighting instead a historical context marked by pluralism, debate, and coexistence. The Fatimid experience demonstrates that even in periods of intense religious and political rivalries, it was possible to construct institutions and communities based on diversity and dialogue. I hope that my book will provide readers not only with historical knowledge, but also with analytical tools and questions that resonate beyond the medieval period, offering perspective that remain relevant to our time, when intercultural and interreligious dialogue and pluralism are more necessary than ever. And finally, for those of you who especially those who follow us online, who want to take note of this, discount code if you're interested in what I just said and you want to find out more, then please take notes. But for now, thank you very much. And I pass the word to my co-Fatimid specialist. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Delia. I want to say what a privilege it is to have Dr. Daftary, to have Delia, to have Simonetta, to have many of you others here, to really talk about the Fatimids. And to your question, Dr. Daftary, about what motivated me to work on the Fatimids, well, when I first came to the Institute as a student, it was I had by that point had exposure to Islamic history sessions in other institutions, including in Karachi, where I had lived for a few years. I had, before coming to the Institute, been at the University of Edinburgh. So I had attended sessions in Islamic history there. So I'd had some exposure. But what I found fascinating was the fact that in the course that was provided at the Institute, we had at that time Professor Abbas Hamdani, the late Professor Abbas Hamdani, who had come to teach us on this program, this master's program with McGill University. It was the first one that was introduced by the Institute back in the Middle Ages. Okay. And so the way that he taught us history was not to just teach about each dynasty or teach through the Shia Sunni polemic, but to teach us the whole mosaic of major developments that occurred from the time of the Prophet till about the 15th century. And so that, for the first time, allowed me to see the developments in Shia Islam, in Sunni Islam, in intellectual currents, of cultural developments, all as part of this mosaic. And I found that extremely enriching and meaningful. And that was my introduction to what then hooked me to study history in particular. Why the Fatimids? Well, that's another very interesting story. I was hugely exercised by the fact that Dai Abu Abdullah al-Shi'i, the founding Dai of the Ismaili Dawa in North Africa, who had spent his lifetime in the cause of establishing the Fatimid Caliphate. Once he had done so and had handed over, the authority to Abdullah al-Mahdi, the first Fatimid Imam Caliph, very soon after, he is put to death for treason. And that exercised me hugely. I could not reconcile how this was possible. And so it made me start reading sources that you were talking about, Dr. Daftary, some of these Ismaili sources, to say, well, what actually happened and why is it that these developments led to this particular end? I will not give away the story for those of you who haven't read it. Please read Please read Delia's book. Talking about my particular books now, the two World of Islam series books. Well, at the Institute, one of the guidance that we've had from our Board of Governors has been that, we have been in the business of producing knowledge, of contributing to knowledge for a long time, for almost 50 years now. Next year will be 50 years of our existence. And we've produced some incredible, if I may say so myself, tomes of knowledge and learning and contributions to the field of Ismaili studies, Shi'i studies more broadly, Quranic studies, of course, and many others. But one of the guidance that we had received from the previous His Highness Prince Shah Karim Al Husseini was to say it is now time that we make some of these materials accessible and engaging to a non-specialist readership. That we draw on robust scholarship, but we make it accessible and engaging. And so, under Dr. Daftary's direction at the time, the World of Islam series was born. And so, these two books on the Fatimids, as you see, do not have the weightiness of Delia's hardback cover. They are paperback. They are also, of course, available in digital formats. They are available in audio formats. They are translated into several languages because the idea is to disseminate these across much wider readership. So that, in a nutshell, I hope responds to the questions you had posed, Dr. Daftary. Now, thank you, Delia, for walking us through the Fatimids, 2.5 centuries of the only sustained Ismaili Shi'i rule in such a succinct and picturesque way. So I will not do that. We've just had you do that beautifully. I then wanted to pick up some key characteristics about the Fatimids. What about them that for me is quite distinctive? And some of these, of course, Delia has already referred to. The fact that when the Fatimids arrive in the southern Mediterranean region, there are already three major thriving empires at the time. So they are arriving in a region, in a scene where you have very vibrant intellectual, cultural, social, economic linkages, as well as very powerful political rivalries and military, obviously, contestations going on. So the Fatimids have to find their place within that bigger picture. The other very interesting thing about the Fatimids in their time of arrival in North Africa, in my view, is that this is the time when there is this whole wave of the fact that the Abbasids had begun to wane in terms of their political authority and their socio-economic control. And so the trade routes, the international trade routes, were beginning to veer west from Syria and Iraq into Egypt and North Africa. The Fatimids come on that cusp. And they are part of, they contribute significantly to it, but they also benefit hugely from it. Because along with this major shift of trade networks was also, of course, the movement of people, of goods, of ideas. So you now have people resettling into Egypt, into Ifriqiya, who were originally from the east, so to speak. Artisans, merchants, all sorts of people. And so the Fatimids benefit from this whole enterprise. And I think that is really quite significant. The other thing that I think is very significant about the Fatimids and interesting, and I don't think much studied yet, is the fact that they truly see themselves as a maritime empire. While they, of course, control this coastal stretch all across North Africa and into Egypt, etc., and of course, their influence spreads much wider than that, it is really the fact that they control the navigation around the southern Mediterranean. So that means that economically they benefit hugely. And militarily, they are able to protect not only their lands, but also offer that kind of protection to others in lieu of course, monies that they receive. This means also, along with the fact that the Fatimids are very successful in controlling sources of gold. In North Africa, they have, of course, these gold mines in Sijil Massa, etc. In Egypt, they have the Nubian sources of gold, of silver. All of this means that they become very affluent. And that affluence means that they are able to do things in ways that other dynasties may not have been able to do. And I'd like to give two examples. When the Fatimids first arrive in North Africa, Abdullah al-Mahdi, whom we've mentioned a few times now, who makes his proclamation as the first Fatimid Imam Caliph, had been a fugitive. He wasn't known. For 150 years prior to this period, the entire Ismaili Dawa had been in what the Ismaili literature calls the Dore Satar, the period of concealment, where the names of the Imam Caliphs, their whereabouts, etc., were all kept secret because the level of persecution by the Abbasids was so intense that the whole movement had gone underground. So when he first declares himself, it is a very nascent beginning for the Fatimids politically. 60 years later, as Delia mentioned, when they arrive in Egypt, they have become real connoisseurs of political power. Their arrival is negotiated and navigated long before the Fatimid armies actually arrive in Egypt. Dawa, the Ismaili Dawa, and diplomacy had already done their work. We know that coins were minted in the name of the fourth Fatimid Imam Caliph al-Mu'izz 15 years before his arrival in Egypt, and they were distributed among the people. Banners had been made available. All the key stakeholders had already been negotiated with in terms of their safekeeping, in terms of their guarantees of safety, etc. Which means that while the sources give us this description of over 100,000 soldiers marching over several months from present-day Ifriqiya to Egypt, present-day Tunisia to Egypt, in fact, this was ceremonial. It takes the army, we are told, 7 days to cross the bridge into Giza to come into Egypt. But there were minor skirmishes. There are no major battles because all the agreements and negotiations have happened with the previous regime. And so it's a relatively peaceful takeover. So you can see the difference of in 60 years. And in that 60 years, the Fatimids cut their teeth on what comes to be called one of the markers of their, or one of the distinguishing markers of the regime, which is being inclusive, being tolerant. Delia already mentioned being pluralistic. Now, what does that really mean for that time? It means that, again, as Delia reminded us, the Fatimids were Ismaili Shia. They never claimed to be anything else. They didn't ever, once they became powerful, didn't ever change sides, so to speak. So they were Ismaili Shia. And as Dr. Daftary has written, by and large, the Fatimids do not actively proselytize outside the Fatimid lands. So they weren't actively proselytizing, which means that the Ismailis remain a minority within a minority, as Delia mentioned, even in Egypt. So that's an interesting dynamic that they don't choose to. So, for example, if we think about the Safavids in the 15th, 16th century, we know that Iran prior to the Safavid takeover was majority Sunni. We know that Iran post the Safavids has remained Shia, majority Shia. Well, this does not happen. And there are many historians, many colleagues who've written about the failure of the Fatimids to actually convert. My thesis is that the Fatimids do something different. They don't feel, well, maybe they tried and they didn't succeed. But in the way they handle this whole question, they create in their doctrine, in the writings of Qadi al-Nu'man, for example, in his Daim al-Islam, they talk about this idea of Iman and Islam. So the idea that there are those who are mu'min, i.e. those who are Ismailis, but there is also this idea of Islam, that is Muslims, and these are all seen as under the dhimma, under the protection of the Fatimid Imam Caliph. And they pick this idea of dhimma very consciously from the example of the Prophet Muhammad and his governance in Medina. And because, of course, as we know in Medina, when the Prophet Muhammad first arrives, the majority of the people in Medina were clearly non-Muslim. But the fact that that Muhammad was ruling over Medina, he then becomes this guarantor of safety of the people living under him. And the Fatimids make this connection and draw upon their Ahl al-Bayt connections very actively and very publicly in their coinage, in their khutbahs, in their ceremonies. So this is part of, I think, one of the things for us to think about. Just as, so the Fatimids, a fun fact about the Fatimids are the only Shia rulers who have ever ruled over Egypt, either before their time and since their time. Egypt has always been Sunni, so to speak. So just as the Fatimids arrive in Egypt and do all the things that, Delia has already mentioned and many of us know about and can read about in these books, Egypt too is transformed. Al-Makrizi, Taqiyuddin al-Makrizi, one of the Mamluk scholars who has written several volumes on the Fatimids, talks about the fact that it is with the arrival of the Fatimids that that Egypt becomes the seat of the caliphate. Prior to that, under the Umayyads, Egypt was a very lucrative province which produced a lot of grain and was therefore always, very kept under close scrutiny because the revenues and the grain from Egypt was always needed, particularly for the Hijaz, and was regularly sent to Mecca and Medina, as we know. Under the Abbasids, of course, it's Iraq that becomes the seat of the caliphate, with Baghdad as the capital. It is under the Fatimids that for the first time in its Muslim rule, it now becomes the seat of the caliphate and continues to be so for the 2.5 centuries that the Fatimids rule, and then continues well after, as we know. So there are some very interesting features. I'll mention one more and then I'll sit down. Delia mentioned cosmopolitanism, and I think that's a really interesting term. And we've had discussions even in that volume on Fatimid cosmopolitanism about what does it mean to use that kind of a term for a period over 1,000 years ago, and is it ahistorical to do so? And of course, there are debates on that itself. But let me pick up one example. And Delia showed us a beautiful image of the rock crystal, which then became so beautifully gilded. And so I just want to pick up this example of the rock crystal. Rock crystal was not mined in Egypt. It was not a local product. It was not a local mineral. It was actually mined in Madagascar, as our colleague Stefan Pradins has beautifully shown. It was mined in Madagascar It was then shipped from there all the way to Egypt across the Indian Ocean. It was then worked upon by artisans from Palestine, Syria, Iraq, many other places, Iran, who became so brilliant at this art that they produced masterpieces that, as Delia then reminded us earlier, became part of the reliquaries of the churches, initially in Italy and Venice, and then, of course, in many other places later. And they became receptacles of keeping the relics of the saints, etc. So you can see that how widespread their influence was and their impact was. We know that there are doors from Junagadh in Gujarat that grace the Fatimid palaces, for example. So we can, and there are many, many such examples. One chapter in the second volume of my book on Fatimids in Egypt actually picks up this whole story of the maritime influence and impact, etc. It is always dangerous to let me speak about the Fatimids because I could go on and on and on and on. I will stop here, and I'm sure in the discussions that we will have some further interesting issues about the challenges that the Fatimid faced, as Delia said, and some of the many, many weaknesses that also their empire suffered, both externally as well as internally, will probably come out in our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Shainool. Before we open up the general Q&A, I would like to ask one more question to both of you. Now that you have done the work, you have written your books, you published them, in your view, after all these years of research and suffering and development, what is the lasting legacy of the Fatimids, and what should we learn from them today?
Would you like to go
To both of you.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the lesson that we can certainly learn from the history of the Fatimids is about how you can share, sort of this idea of, for example, of the shared Mediterranean, that no matter what what relationships are, there are integrated worlds. There are worlds that interconnect, but also for the general public, I think the lesson is to think about Islamic history as not monochromatic, as monolith, as silos, as we are not talking here with the Fatimids about Islamic history only, but we are talking about the history of the medieval world that was shared. That was so. We are not about. This is not about a kind of an afterthought into the history, which is often understood and thought of in a kind of Eurocentric terms, but this is an integral part of it, and therefore this is something that is very important to remember and to think about, and because it helps us to think about Islam and Islamic history in a very different, constructive way. In terms of what else is left to do? Well, I got very excited about the last chapter of my book about the legacy, and because suddenly I find that these Fatimids are everywhere. Wherever we look, from the fountain pen that we hold today, and then we find that it was the Imam Caliph al-Muizz that thought it all and had the prototypes done. And then I got very excited about the fact that you can play the Fatimids on a video game. I never played a video game in my life. And then suddenly I was there looking at all these possibilities. Novels, thank you very much, Professor Gali, for mentioning, this new book that is about how the Fatimids have inspired novels, etc., and something that I was very excited to. So now I'm progressing into that line of inquiry with more evidence of where we can find the Fatimids.
Thank you. What were your findings?
So I guess a couple. One, that the Fatimids are a dynasty in the Khaldunian sense of the word, like any other dynasty. They have a rise, they have an efflorescence, and then they have a fall. And that pattern is no different to the Fatimids as it is to any other dynasty. And I think that's important to recognize that even in that sense, they are not unique. But what's interesting are the living communities that see themselves connected to the Fatimids still. And Delia speaks about that very, very interestingly in her book. And if I can recommend, of course, read the whole book. But her last chapter on legacy was one that I really found fascinating. So I was very pleased to hear that you're going to work more on that, because I think there's some really incredible material. But I think that idea that there are living communities, that's one. Second, I think, are some of the lessons that the Fatimids learned and some of the values that they tried to espouse. That doesn't mean that they always succeeded. But I think this idea that in Egypt, which was when the Fatimids arrived in Egypt, Egypt was only just beginning to be majority Muslim, which meant that it had a very strong indigenous Coptic presence. And there were many other Christian denominations, Melkites, Nestorians, who had been there for centuries. We know there were several Jewish communities there. To arrive in a land like that and to be able to create a way of working, a way of governance that enables people from different ethnic and religious backgrounds, because of course we all know Egypt is one of the earliest cradles of human civilization. So in Egypt have by that time were already peoples of so many different ethnic backgrounds as well. And to work with that kind of diversity, and one of the experiments I think that they tried was this idea of enabling, allowing people from different ethnic and religious backgrounds to actually participate in the governance in the administration of the country. And I think in some ways that served them really well. In some ways, it also caused a lot of problems. But I think that ethic, that idea of creating a more inclusive way of governance, of administration, I think is something that we could learn from today and we could benefit. And in terms of what I'm sorry,
The tolerance.
and the tolerance. And to this day, that is one thing that by and large historians recognize of this period, by and large. Of course, there are exceptions. And in terms of your second question, what am I on to now? Well, I'm working on a monograph on the Fatimid Imam Caliph Al-Aziz Billah. So he is somebody who is buffered by Imam al-Mu'izz, the founder of Cairo and, the founder of the fountain pen, etc. And the enigmatic Imam al-Hakim. But his is a 25-year, around, a quarter of a century rule, which to my mind and to the work I'm doing showcases that really it is in the time of Al-Aziz that the foundations of Fatimid rule in Egypt are laid. Because Imam Mu'izz only rules in Egypt, stays in Egypt for 2.5 years. That's right. So that's the period I am examining, and I'm hoping that we will have some interesting learnings coming out.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Good.
We have two sets of books here. What is how did they connect, and what is the
Speak to each other.
Yes, they speak to each other. Well, I call, if you allow me, Shainool's books instant gratification. So, you have your answers there, whereas this one, my book is the immersive experience, sort of it's a kind of more relaxed and sort of and continued engagement with the dynasty and extractors, both, pleasurables in many ways, but it's this is how the two connect and how they differ somehow, and but addressing audiences that we invite to to appreciate the work that we have done. Yes.